So I've been working on and off on like a sort of futuristic cityscape because I want to. And I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about how to get this atmospheric fog and how to relight 3D, either just to make decisions on the lighting that you want slightly differently, or because I got this initial idea using the normal pass and color range from Pascal Blanche, how to actually, you can stylize your 3D and make it look more graphic and postery. So, and it's all to do with two things. It's to do with the Z depth or Z depth, and it's to do with the normal pass. Right, so first of all, I'm going to talk through the Z depth. So I'm just going to hide all this stuff here and take off the Z depth as it is at the moment. There we go, almost there. So yeah, something like that. Right, so we're going to use Z depth to, it's got a bit of atmosphere anyway at the moment because all of these little lights have little volume fog. They're working through the volume of the environment. But if you want to add something like atmospheric haze onto your CG render, where things look like they get foggier as they go into the distance, you have to use the Z depth. Now, I'll show you in a moment how you get that out of Maya, but I'll show you first what it looks like when you bring it into Photoshop. So I'm going to load up Z depth, and it's going to look like this, which is a bit alarming, I think. Hopefully it doesn't take too long to download. Yep, alpha channel. So you render something in Maya, and you bring in your Z depth, and it just looks like that. The reason it looks like that is it's a 32-bit image, which means these pixels are no longer 0 to 255. These pixels now are 0, meaning basically at the camera's position, and whatever amount of units they are away from the camera. So it's less like you're looking at a normal color image. You're looking at an image that contains literally where that pixel is in space in 3D. Which means, of course, most of them are going to be over 255 units away from the camera. So they're going to, when Photoshop brings them in, it's just going to look completely white. You just got to, well, I'm going to show you that it is there, but you've got to do some stuff to make that Z depth appear. So it comes in as a 32-bit image. What you have to do is you have to turn it into an 8-bit image. And instantly, when you do that, it'll darken and you can start to see your objects, your scene begin to appear. Now you've got to do a couple of changes because the ideal kind of Z depth is that the thing that's closest to the camera is kind of black, and the thing that's farthest away from the camera is just white. You just got to jump through a few little hoops in Photoshop to do that. So you go to image mode and then go to 8-bit, and then this little option will turn up. You turn down radius to nothing, and you turn down strength because you don't want any glowiness happening just here. Next, you want to turn exposure up pretty much to full, or 5. It'll change depending on the image. The more depth you've got in the image, the more tweaking of these sliders you might have to experiment with. And then you pull this gamma down to, well, almost down to nothing like this. So now you're getting an actual proper Z depth image. You go OK, and it goes from 32-bit, which it did have just here. Now it says 8 bits. It's now a normal 8-bit image, and you can actually paint with it and do things like that. The one thing I like to do just before I use it is, if I can actually see my adjustment layers here, is bring up the levels, and you see this. The levels obviously show you what the darkest point in the image is and what the lightest point in the image is. And at the moment, though, the entire range of the image has a bunch of useless space. So we're going to use the levels just to sort of remap it so that this farthest away bit really does become white, and this closest bit really does become black. So you just pull these in until it kind of looks like that. Hopefully that kind of makes a logical sense. You're just kind of remapping these points to where the actual pixel information is. Now you've got a really usable Z depth image, which you can copy and use onto your scene. In some ways, when I look at this, it almost does look like a sort of very odd, strange, foggy scene, like incredible weird white fog that objects kind of peek out from. Anyway, how do you use it in Photoshop to actually suggest fogginess? So down here, here's where I mean, this is how I like to do it. I try and be relatively organized. So I put all my 3D stuff in a little group called render passes. And I've got my Z-depth here. If you hold down Alt and you click the eyeball, you can isolate a layer in Photoshop, so you can just have a look at it. But it's a bit twitchy. If you start clicking on another layer and do something, it will forget that you isolated this, and you have to individually turn them one by one. There is some kind of trick, I think, using the history, but I just try and be fairly strict myself, and I only look at it. So I look at this and go, right, I'm going to use this Z-depth. But before I do that, I'm going to create a layer above my normal render. And I'm going to give it a color that's a kind of desaturated, light-ish kind of blue. Now, this is going to be the color of your fog. So I'm going to give it something like that, and I'm just going to flood fill the whole image. The next thing you need is a layer mask, which is this little button hiding on the taskbar here, or just above, behind the taskbar. So you put a layer mask in. Now, of course, if you were to paint into that layer mask with black, you're revealing the layer below. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use the Z-depth in this layer mask. So where it's black, it's going to reveal what's below it. Where it's white, it's not going to reveal it. And where it's grey, it's going to reveal it in kind of gradations, which is what's going to give us the foggy effect. So let's go down here, not to volume, to Z-depth. You've got to make sure that you've actually highlighted this, because what you're going to do now is go Control A and Control C. So we've just copied the whole Z-depth kind of pass. And I'm going to Alt-click the eyeball again. And I'm going to go into my layer mask by holding Alt and clicking it. I'm going to paste that Z-depth straight into the layer mask, like that. Now, here's where the magic happens. Now when you click back into your normal layer, if you click out of the layer mask, now you've got this misty bluish kind of fog that your building seems to kind of reach up out of. So it kind of simulates what's actually happening with real atmosphere. Now you can control the amount of fog by either changing the opacity. That's easy enough. So you can just give it just a little bit. You could also mess around with the layer mask itself. So I bring up levels here. If I just move the white point, that does the equivalent of opacity. But what I can also do is if I shift the gamma point, this midpoint, I can literally bring that fog closer and further away from the camera. I hope some of you are going, oh, I could do some stuff with that. That's quite interesting. Now you can go further, because at the moment we've just got a blank color in here. Instead of a blank color, I'm going to disable the layer mask by holding Shift and clicking it. What I could do instead, I could select this, and I could maybe just adjust the color a little bit. Maybe make it a little bit darker, maybe a tiny bit more saturated, maybe shift the hue a little bit, maybe a little bit more towards the cyany kind of greeny, turquoisey bit. Now I can go to Filter, Render, and Render Clouds. It'll give me that. So I filled it with kind of a cloudy fog. If I reactivate the layer mask, now I've got sort of clouds. Now it's too much when it's like this. So you can just pull this down just enough. So now you've got some variations in your fog. And you can play around with what this looks like to your heart's content. So that's using the Z-depth to get fog into your scene. You could go, I mean, you don't have to have blank colors and clouds. You could put an image in here. So you could find, literally find a photograph of some misty fog. You could almost warp it into perspective or not, and apply it that way. And that way you'd have even more photographic, kind of real kind of look. So that's Z-depth and fog. I just want to quickly now talk about this idea of using the normal pass. So this is what a normal pass looks like. So it looks a bit strange, right? Whereas the Z-depth pixels, the Z-depth pass said to the pixels, this is where this pixel is in 3D space, or distance from camera, I should be a bit more accurate here. What the normal pass does is it says, this is the direction that each pixel is facing. This is really, really useful for relighting it because you can specify the direction of load. You can select a range of directions of pixels and then do stuff and relight it. I'll show you. So what you have to do first, well actually let's bring it back again, is you use color range just down here. So make sure, it's very important that you're actually on the layer, otherwise the selection won't work. You go to color range, you've got a little dibber here for picking spots. Now let's say I wanted to add some kind of a bluish light, where I want to accentuate some bluish light coming from this direction. So the sun at the moment is coming from this direction. I want it to come from this direction. So I would select the direction I want. So I can select this. And you can see already in the selection here that it's selected all the pixels that are facing that way. Now I can put add on now. I can add more to the selection. So I could say, well, I also want the pixels that face a bit more towards the camera here. You can see that selection build up. And of course with color range you've got an option for fuzziness that essentially allows you to sort of fade off that selection. So if you bring it fuzziness down to almost nothing, then it literally has only selected those pixels. But if you add a bit of fuzziness, you can add a bit of softness and fall off to that. So let's say we go to here and go OK. So now it's selected everything in the scene, the 3D scene, that's kind of facing that way and a little bit towards us. Let's click off of here and go to our beauty copy. Well, actually, I'm going to go above it because I'm going to apply it. No, I'm going to apply it underneath the fog because I want the fog to go on top of this color correction. Now, I don't know if you remember, hopefully most of you do, that if you've got a selection and you create an adjustment layer, it's going to automatically fill the layer mask with what's in that selection. So if I go to hue saturation, it's created that layer mask now, and if I click into that, that's what the layer mask looks like. So anything that I do in this adjustment layer is only going to affect the stuff that's white. This is the way Pascal Blanche does it. So if you want like a kind of a really vivid, postery kind of looking image, you kind of do it this way. So you hit colorize first. Instantly you can see that it's colorized all this stuff facing that way. Now you can choose the color that you want just by sliding this along. So I want to be relatively subtle, so I'm going to go for a blue. Now you can control the lightness of it. So you can bring light back into your scene in a more stylized kind of way. Or you can do it really, really subtly, just to add a little blue fill light. So if it's down at here, it's not quite as noticeable. So up to here, it's really noticeable. Pascal Blanche does it in a real kind of, vivid postery kind of way. So that's how you do that. You can choose any color. Now you can add loads of this. This will allow you to essentially relight your entire scene in Photoshop without having to go back to Maya or your 3D application of choice and re-render the whole thing. So it's extremely useful. And of course, I'm just using hue and saturation. You could use anything in here. You could use exposure just to add a little bit more intensity to the light coming from a certain direction. How do you get this though from Maya? Let's show you. I'm going to create a super simple scene, which is just a plane, and I'm just going to select some faces like this and extrude them up. I'm also going to include a donut, or a torus as they're technically called, just because that will show off the normal pass a bit better, and put it just here. And final thing, I'll just put sun and sky, so I've got some kind of light kind of going on. Okay, so you go to the render settings, and you go to Arnold, you go to AOVs, sorry. I covered a bit of this late last year when we were doing ID passes and light passes, and I think I showed ambient occlusion to some people as well. So it's the same thing, it's just different kind of settings you've got to add. Now, you might be able to do it using just the N, but I don't know for sure, so I'm just going to do it the way that I know works for sure. So you go Add Custom, give it a name, I'm going to call this WorldNormal, go Create, and then if you do this little drop-down triangle and go to Select AOV Node, this comes up, it all came up automatically. Let's just expand this a bit so I can see it. You want to go to the shader and go down to shader in Arnold and choose utility. You just have to set two things in here. You have to change it from shade mode from n.i to flat, and color mode from color to normal. You get a little preview of what it's going to look like. So that's going to set up that AOV for your world normal. So now when you render, obviously that's your beauty render, but now you've got the option here of world normal. And that's what it looks like, just down there. So that's your world normals kind of set up. And when you finish with that, you can just save it. Save image. Save it as, I mean, for the more techie amongst you, I would advise begin experimenting by saving out EXR file formats, because they give you more range and option of making stuff brighter and darker before things start getting crunchy and yucky. But so I would, for the more techie amongst you, do it that way. For the less techie amongst you, just save it out as a TIFF. So that's your beauty. The Z depth is even easier. You just go to Z just here, and you move it across using this little arrow. So now you've got your Z depth, and it shows up here. Notice it's a floating point. That's one of the giveaways. So it's not really giving you a red, green, and blue. It's giving you a floating point number. So each pixel has like a number like 55.692969, whatever, which is exact distance from the camera. And again, if we render this now, again, we go to the Z depth, you're going to see it looking completely white. But remember, just trust, it is there, that depth information's there. But if you get really paranoid and you want to know for sure, this slider here is an exposure slider. So if you move this down, and you might have to move it down quite a lot, like -10, you might have to enter in a number. You can actually see, yeah, it is actually there. It's just hiding, okay? And there you go. And then you save those out, bring them into Photoshop, and you can relight your stuff, and you can add cool atmospheric haze that's going to add a lot more depth to your image. As an aside, this scene is this scene was an experiment with something I want to probably talk about next semester, which is kit bashing. Some people have already experimented with it on the homework, and fair play to them. Kit bashing meant that I could build this scene in, you know what, this bit here, the foreground, took longer than this bit, even though this bit looks just insanely complicated. This whole kind of city is essentially made up of, I think, 4 different kind of kit bashed mechanical pieces. They're just like random mechanical little chunky things, and you play with them as if it was like Lego, just sort of bashing them together. The textures on them, I didn't want to try and do all this in Substance. It was just too much of a pain. If I'm going into Photoshop, I'm probably going to retexture it anyway. The texture on this is simply a photo I took of the side of a piece of farming equipment. I colorized it a bit blue, and then I made a low contrast grayscale version for the roughness, and then I used the same thing for bump. So I didn't even bother with a normal map. I didn't use automatic unwrapping. I just cylindrically unwrapped it. So just, well, you could use automatic. It really doesn't matter, because the point is you're going to be texturing it and playing with it in Photoshop. But it meant that once I made one piece, I could then duplicate it and stretch it and rotate it and make an entire kind of, looks a bit like, it's a cross between Blade Runner and Coruscant from Star Wars, I guess. I can make this entire cityscape in about an hour and a half. So I'm going to cover that kit bashing in more detail probably next semester, probably fairly early on, because I want some of you to start playing with that in earnest. And the kit bash set that I got this from wasn't from Kitbash 3D. It was from, I think I typed free, let's see if I can rediscover the search term that I used. Free Kitbash Gumroad. Is it this one? No, it wasn't that one, but there's another free one. Free hard surface one, is this it? No, not that one. But you can see there are lots of free kit bash. Get them free if you're going to do it. Don't. I think it's this one actually. Yeah, it was this one. This one's amazing. So it comes with it's essentially 15 FBX files, and each FBX file has 25 pieces. Now they're not UV'd or anything like that. They've got no textures, and they're quite high poly. So you want to be fairly careful the way you use them. Yeah, in fact, you know what? You see this bit just here? That bit there is the basis of this bit popping out just here. And what I was quite pleased with this bit, there's one of the pieces in that set is this lovely slightly curved bit with pipes, but it's only 1/4. And I just sort of duplicated 3 more times and sort of mirrored it to make this cool little sort of rounded edge building kind of thing come up. Yeah, so if you are experimenting with kit bashing, continue to do it, but really unlock that power of using the Zdepth pass to add lots and lots of mist and fog, and the normal pass, so you've got control over its lighting. All these little twinkly glowy lights are just, I wonder if I can find it. Actually, no, I think maybe I've got them on, I know they're, let me see. References, where are you? Reference material. Is it here? It's just a bunch of city lights. It's probably the default one that you find if you type in city, or I don't know, yeah, office building lights texture. Yeah, I think it's one of these. It's one of these. Yeah, I think it's this one, I think, but a bigger version of it. So all those twinkly lights is that kind of photo warped into perspective, because this is, I've shot this with this is sort of rendered as if it were shot with a long telephoto lens, 150 millimeter lens, which makes the perspective actually even easier because there's not much converging to a vanishing point. It's almost like an isometric kind of game. And then just laid it on top, and it's applied with color dodge. Right, okay, so that's Ant's Friday Tips. Let's just finish that, and I'll upload that tonight when I get home.